Welcome back to the Ex-Homeschoolers Club. I am, of course, your host, Jacob Gooden, and today it is just me, myself, and I. That's right, I'm doing a solo episode. And, this show, I've talked a lot about my favorite things about homeschooling. I've talked a lot about the positives and how I think that it's worth a try if you're thinking about it for your kids. But one of the things that we haven't highlighted so much on the show is the bad and the ugly. And so I wanted to take an episode and talk about the bad stuff. And I'm going to be talking about purity culture and growing up in purity culture. Now, purity culture is not exclusively a homeschool thing. It's more of a Christian thing. But because I was a Christian homeschool kid, it's really hard to separate the two because a lot of my community, we just existed inside of that same bubble together. And yeah, so I'm gonna share my experience with it. Now, I will give a little bit of a trigger warning. I'm gonna be talking about sex. I'm gonna be talking about pornography. I'm gonna be talking about masturbation. I'm gonna be talking about the downstairs area, the swimsuit area, the no-no square. So if that's something you don't want to hear me talk about, I recommend skip today's episode. It's okay. I'll be back next week with another one, or we'll go listen to a past episode with one of my guests. But I felt like it was something important that I wanted to share and get off my chest. All right, so let's dive into it. A little bit of understanding about me before we really kick it off. And I wanted to share the brief overview of my Christian experience and where I sit today so you can kind of understand some context of like when I was in high school and a young kid going through this, where I existed inside of Christianity. So, born and raised in a Christian household. When I was a young kid, I accepted Jesus into my heart. I got baptized around the age of 10, I want to say. And then I served and worshiped and, was at churches up until my early 20s. And I was part of a youth group. I was part of a worship team. I would set chairs up. I'd tear chairs down. I did the sound system. When I was in college, I served at a brand new church that literally didn't even have its own building. So we would go build the whole church in the morning, get up at the crack of dawn on a Sunday, go build this whole thing, run events at the thing, serve on the worship team, tear it all down after the fact. I also went to a Christian college, and so we had chapel. We were required to go to some chapel every single week. And so there was a point in my life where I was going to church-like things 5 to 7 days a week. On top of that, reading my Bible, listening to worship music, like praying, all that stuff. I was very much in it, very thick, and I truly believed in God. Flash forward a little bit after college, and I started to kind of question my faith a little bit. There were some things that happened in college that I started to wake up to some ideas and be open to the idea that maybe I didn't 100% know everything. And so I started asking questions, and I got really interested in pursuing more knowledge. And ultimately, it led me to a place of being agnostic. So that's where I sit currently. And what that means for me is that I'm open to the idea that there is a God. I'm also open to the idea that there isn't a God. And I'm okay with just not knowing right now and just asking questions and seeking answers. So that's where I sit currently. I know that's a very brief overview and not a ton of detail there. If you want to hear more about that, I'm happy to share about it. But yeah. So, purity culture, growing up in it, very thick in the Christian environment when I was in high school and going through puberty, things like that. So what is purity culture? If you're not familiar with purity culture is this idea of like an abstinence-only teaching within the church. So sex before marriage, wrong. Things like pornography, wrong. Masturbation, wrong. Dating, wrong. Courtship, okay. There was also kind of these underlying things in there, and I'll get into some of the specifics of like what it looked like played out a little bit more. But yeah, it was just kind of this like anything sexual before you're married, wrong, sinful, need to be repentive of. When you're going through puberty, everything is sexual, even when You don't want it to be. And that's just your hormones, right? Your hormones are kicking in. You're growing body hair. Well, as a guy, you're growing body hair. You're starting to smell more. You're popping boners left and right because, well, a gust of wind turns you on, kind of a thing. And so it's a very tricky area to navigate. You already just feel awkward and weird. And then you've got your parents coming in there and telling you things about like the birds and the bees and, but then pushing kind of this idea of purity culture, right? And putting you in an environment where that's being taught. And so you're going along with it because, that's what you think is right. So let me give you a couple examples of like purity culture played out a little bit for me. So purity culture for guys was primarily this idea of like, do not look at pornography and do not masturbate. I feel like that was the big emphasis of like, do not do these things. They are wrong. They are sinful. They degrade you as a man, and that kind of a thing. That being said, a lot of us watch porn, myself included. But then some of the other smaller ways that things like this played out inside of the homeschool community was things like forward-facing hugs, not a reality between the opposite sexes, right? A lot of us did like the Christian awkward side hug thing, and some of us still do it to this day. I'm guilty of that sometimes as well. Still, it's just kind of burned in my brain. Well, there was kind of this concept of like boys are blue, girls are red, together they make purple. At a lot of our events and things like that, we don't make purple. Okay, so there's that. There's also like there wasn't a lot of dating within our group as well. There was a few courtships, but yeah, a lot of us didn't date each other because it was just we were all friends, right? And I think we were just a lot of us were also just being told, well, you guys are all friends, like. And I mean, I know I was told this by people. It's like, well, why would you want to ruin friendships by like potentially dating somebody and then you break up and then you just ruin it for everybody, right? Because we all know that when people break up, then they just can't get along ever again. This was something that was played out again inside of the homeschool group. I know for the girls, I've had a couple people on now who've talked about this, but at like the homeschool dances, there was dress code for the girls, that kind of a thing. Growing up in Southern California, when we go to the beach, a lot of the girls that we grew up with, they wore one-piece bathing suits, shorts, a tankini. I knew a lot of girls who made their own bathing suits and things like that. And so, but for us guys, it was a lot easier. You just wear board shorts, not a big deal. Move on, forget about it. So a lot of my sexual education comes from three places, okay? My sexual education comes from my dad giving me the birds and the bees talk, and I think he gave me maybe 2 or 3 of these chats. So there's the initial one, right, of like your body is changing, and also like, here's how procreation works. And I don't remember him being very explicit about it. I don't think he did a bad job. I don't think he did a good job. I think he just did a medium job. Sorry, Dad. But I think he also was uncomfortable talking about it. And so I think he just wrestled with how to do it. Second place my sex education came from was the church. And my church did these things called purity conferences. And at these purity conferences, they were usually a day. I think they were a day, maybe 2 at the max. But it was essentially a time where it was speakers from within the church telling us how sex before marriage was wrong. You should, if you do that, you need to repent because it's sinful. Watching pornography was wrong. Masturbation was wrong, sinful. God hated that kind of stuff. And backing all this up with Bible verses that sometimes were just taken out of context, other times not. But yeah, and then being put in an environment too where we're also being told as men, we have a responsibility to the women to keep them pure, and then the women, they have a responsibility to keep the men pure, right? And so it's kind of this just like weird circle of like, you're kind of responsible for yourself, but you're also responsible for other people. Yeah. And then during that, you do a breakout session. And in that breakout session, it's guys and girls separated, different parts of the building. And I remember for the guys, we talked about, there's 2 main things that we talked about. There was the creating an accountability group. What an accountability group was supposed to do was hold you accountable for when you started to go down a sinful path, regardless if it was sexual or not. However, we're teenage boys. Everything is like sexually charged, right? And so a lot of times it was just us kind of being like, oh, watched porn again. Oh, had a, lustful thought after somebody. Oh, which, and then basically us then telling each other, well, you need to pray about that. You need to read your Bible and you need to repent. Again, coming from a place of like boys who are the same age being accountable to each other to do what exactly? We're all on the same page of like none of us know any better than the other people. So aside from just telling our friends that, well, you need to read your Bible and pray more, what other advice are we supposed to give them? Because I'm struggling with the same thing. So accountability groups, and like I said, they were more than just sexual sin. It also had to do with, other sins, lying, cheating, the whole gamut of anything, right? The second thing that we were kind of that was emphasized at that was kind of this like the worth of a woman, right? And how to find a godly woman and what to be looking for, right? There's like the Psalm 23, 28 woman, something like that. Someone's going to correct me. Forgive me. I haven't read the Bible in a couple years. And it's this passage in scripture that basically outlines like what a godly woman looks like. And it's used for everything. And like, I don't know, there's a whole gamut. Dudes use this as an example of like, this is the kind of woman I'm looking for in my life. So we're told kind of what to be looking for in a woman and a wife and a potential mate. And then we're given this example. And to this day, this example still weirds me out, grosses me out. It's still confusing to me a little bit. But basically, it's the example of an apple pie. So a guy brings out an apple pie, sets it on the table, asks everyone, who wants a slice of apple pie? Almost every hand in the room goes up because who doesn't love apple pie? He takes his index finger, he puts it in the middle of the pie, pulls it out, asks again, who wants a slice of apple pie? And a few hands go down, but most people are okay with it, right? We know this guy. We're like, okay, his hands are clean. It's okay. He just, I can eat around it. He then takes 3 fingers, puts them in the pie, pulls them out, asks the same thing. More hands are going down. There's still people who are like, I could eat around it. I could, whatever. It's not a big deal. He then takes his hand, starts to like crumble up the pie. Now it doesn't look like a pie anymore. It looks more like an apple crumble. And he asks again. And now hands are coming down, right? It's maybe 50-50 shot, who wants it kind of a thing. And because we're like, even if his hands are clean, like he touched everything at this point in this pie. Then he spits in the pie and asks again and mixes it in. So he spits in the pie, takes his hands, mixes it up. Disgusting. Then he asks again, who wants a slice of apple pie? And at this point, there's like the one dude who's like, I'd still eat it. But pretty much everyone's hands are down. And this example was meant to exemplify the different, like going to different bases almost with a woman, and then her value associated with those, right? And so the regular beginning apple pie that everyone was like, yeah, I'd love a slice of that. That is like a virgin. That's a godly woman, right? That's the everything, that we want, okay? Putting the first finger in, he kind of alluded to that being like hand holding, it's, not that destructive, doesn't devalue the pie that much, right? A couple more, sticking 3 fingers in was like, okay, we're starting to get in kissing territory, a little more touching, maybe more hugging kind of a thing. So again, it's like a lot of people were still okay with it, and we're like, I could eat around that kind of a thing. But she's starting to like be this used up thing. Then you get to the third one, and it's like, okay, now we're talking about like heavy petting and like makeout sessions, right? And, and more and more people are like, I don't know, I don't feel comfortable with this as much. And then the final one is like premarital sex, right? A girl who's had premarital sex is just this disgusting apple pie that's been spit in. Now, we're also being told that that's kind of like, while he used it to represent women, there also was a slight lean towards like, this is also you, right? As a man, your value goes down because there's this gold standard. You get the crown if you stay a virgin till literally your wedding night, kind of a thing. And so, but it's not emphasized as heavily as it is that like women who do these things are worthless, right? And as someone who grew up with family members who had kids out of wedlock, obviously had premarital sex, I had never looked at them as like a worthless, crumbled up spit in apple pie. And even after that, I don't feel like I looked at them that way. I still looked at them as people with value. But it was just this weird in the back of your brain kind of view of like how people are. And that's not to say that I never judged anybody. I knew people who had premarital sex and who were, maybe more affectionate with their boyfriends or whatever. And there is kind of a weird, within Christianity, there's kind of this weird like, well, you're okay with doing that, but that like lowers your value. So it definitely impacted me. Let's just say that. And so, these are the types of things we were being taught. So to walk away from that day, it's weird to then go back into a room with all these girls and be looking at them like, okay, so these are all pies. And at that point, we don't know a lot of them and their sexual sin. And so looking at them as like these whole pies, it's just, I don't know. It's kind of a weird analogy. And for anybody who was at one of these things or remembers this kind of thing, or if you were a girl at one of these things, please like reach out to me because I want to know what happened in the girls' side of things and hear kind of the conversations that were happening back there because I just don't know. I just know what happened in the guy's side. And so that was kind of, again, sex ed number 2, right? Sex ed number 3 came from pornography because even though pornography was wrong and sinful, you still have questions, right? I still had questions. Well, why was I getting a boner? Okay, well, what do boobs look like? What does a vagina look like? All those kinds of things. And there's really, I don't want to say there's only one way to find that out, but it felt like at the time there was only one way to find that out. And if you Google boobs, what's going to come up? A link to Pornhub. There's also a danger associated with it, right? It's like, oh, it's bad. You want to be a bad kid, whatever. But so sex ed, my third area that I got sex education from was pornography. Not very healthy because it's a fantasy. It's not reality. And so, and that's going to come into play a little bit later in my life too. But so in addition to getting an education from that, I also then felt a lot of shame because I knew I was doing something that was considered wrong. And usually with looking at pornography, it wasn't just a like, oh, I wonder what this is like. It's also I wonder what this is like, and then getting turned on while watching and ending up masturbating, right? And so there's like double shame associated with it. And I know it's wrong. And then that leads to, I meet with my accountability group and they're telling me you need to pray harder and you need to whatever. And it's like, it's a giant circle jerk at some point, right? So let's flash forward a little bit. So again, we talked about high school, didn't date anybody. A lot of my friends didn't date people. So there wasn't a lot of like sexual anything, and so there was no opportunity to have kind of this like, oh, I have a girlfriend. Oh, I know what kissing's like, anything like that. I get to college and it was like all bets are off. I was like, I can date anybody I want. I can make out with somebody. I can, I wasn't necessarily thinking along the lines of like, oh, I can have sex with somebody, because I still had this in my brain that I was like, no, I'm going to stay a virgin until I'm married, mentality. But I definitely went into it a lot more with like, okay, now I'm going to date somebody and I'm going to like find a partner kind of a thing, even if it's just for fun. And I've only ever had like 2 relationships. One of them was very much like surface level dating. We went out a couple times, liked each other. It didn't work out. And then I dated my now wife. And both times I realized that I was really scared. I was really scared of dating. I was really scared of anything that was like remotely sexual, because even the idea of dating was still, well, I didn't have people telling me like, oh, you have to like, you're going to be doing this like chaperoned, not dating, but courtship type of situation. I still had in my brain that it's like, well, I want to date someone with the intention that I'm going to marry this person. And that's heavy. That's a lot to put on an 18, 19-year-old kid, right? Because there's a lot of life left to live. And so I kind of went into it with that. And then also with the understanding that I was like, okay, I don't want to have sex till I'm married. I'm okay, like, holding hands. I'm okay kissing. I was comfortable with those things. But, yeah, so I started dating my now wife. And there was a lot of things that just were, like, hard for me. It was hard for me to kiss her the first time because it was just like I didn't know what I was doing, one, but also I felt like I was maybe taking advantage of this person, right? And I was like devaluing them in some way. And thankfully, we'll talk about this near the end of the episode, but thankfully I had some consent education, and so I understood that, like, before I kissed her, I was like, "Can I kiss you?" Kind of thing. But yeah, I just felt really weird about it. I liked it. I liked kissing her, but I just felt awkward about it, and like I was like, maybe I'm devaluing this person. I didn't feel really any shame around it, but it felt weird. Well, one thing leads to another, and ultimately, we ended up having sex, premarital sex. And afterwards, I remember just feeling this wave of like guilt and shame and disgust in myself, and like I had ruined somebody, and I had ruined myself. And there was a part of me that was like, I don't give a fuck, like, whatever. And then there's a part of me that's like, oh no, like, if I don't end up with this person, I've devalued myself. And will somebody ever want me? Will someone ever want her? Because, we're no longer virgins, right? And there's no going back. And so that continued. Like, we started to have a sex life, and it's still, and I wasn't communicating this to my partner. I was just like, we were having sex, and then these were just emotions that were running through my brain after the fact of just this like guilt and shame and disgust in myself. And it took a really long time, including even after we were married, of just like having to battle this. And I'll get a little bit into like what changed for me, but yeah, so there was definitely this like, don't do this. It also didn't help. I went to a Christian college, and we had signed lifestyle agreements, and in that lifestyle agreement, you agreed to not have premarital sex. I don't know how I don't know how they were gonna like uphold any of this. I knew plenty of people in college who had sex, and broke pretty much every rule in that book. But yeah, kind of a weird thing as well, but again, even my accountability group that I had in college with dudes, again, when we were going to each other and saying, oh yeah, I'm still, watching porn, or I'm still whatever, there was this still kind of like, well, just pray about it, be better about it, and these were dudes who were not homeschooled. These were just dudes who were other Christian dudes from all over the country. And so again, I still felt like I'm a porn addict because I watch it, because I jerk off to it. And then I started having sex, and I was like, now I'm also like, I'm a filthy whore, basically. I was like, I am valueless at this point, and I have devalued this other person. So that being said, these things these feelings, these emotions kind of continued. And so even after I left Christianity when I was about 22-ish, 23, there was still this weird guilt. And even to this day, I think sometimes when I talk about certain things that are sexual, I think it's hard because it was, again, we didn't talk about this as kids. We didn't talk about this with parents. We didn't talk about this with religious leaders. We didn't talk about this with anybody. It was just like, figure it out for yourself. And so even after I left Christianity, I still wrestled with these feelings of like guilt and shame associated around sex. And so, but I was like, I knew in my brain that I was like, this isn't normal and I shouldn't be experiencing this. And so I was like, I gotta do something. What really sent me over the edge, and this is me getting very vulnerable with you guys, was that I started to have some erectile issues, and I was having trouble maintaining an erection or even getting an erection, whether it was with a partner or solo. And that was scary because I was like, oh no, I'm going to have to take the little blue pill. Viagra, for anybody who doesn't know what that is. And I was like, I don't want to do that. I'm like in my 20s. I should still be good. And so I started to educate myself on like how this stuff works, and started to also be like, okay, I think these feelings of like, I also, because I was leaving religion, I also felt a lot of shame and a lot of guilt around I'm leaving, and I felt this pressure that I was disappointing my family, I was disappointing my friends, that my parents' friends were going to look down on them because they had a kid who walked away, right? And there's the Bible verse, the famous Bible verse, that train up a child in the way he should go, and when he's old, he will not depart from it. And so there was a lot of factors, right, that were just bigger than even like sexual factors in this whole thing. But I started to educate myself. So what happened? Well, I listened to this podcast called Ear Biscuits. Yeah, Ear Biscuits, with Rhett and Link from Good Mythical Morning. If you're not familiar with them, love them. I've watched them since I was a kid. And they are two former Christians who are, no longer Christians. So aside from listening to them because they tell great stories, and they had shared their leaving religion stories, which is again how I kind of got tied back into their podcast, they did a month it was September, and they renamed it Sextember, and they talked about their sex lives. And they had a sex expert come on there and share about the guilt associated with sex, because they were telling their stories of like saving themselves for marriage, and the guilt and the shame they felt when they would like have a makeout session with their like fiance, who became their wives. And I was like, okay, this woman's onto something. So I started listening to her podcast. Her podcast is called Sex with Emily. It's a great podcast. Highly encourage people to listen to it. She talks about whole gamut of everything having to do with the kink like following to sexual performance, to male pleasure, toys, anything and everything you could ever imagine, right? Relationship types, all that kind of stuff. So very interesting. So I started listening to her, and then she recommended a couple books, and I read a couple books or listened to a couple books, and I just started going down this pathway of seeking out answers to the questions I had. And slowly but surely, my guilt and my shame started to go away. And while I won't say it's 100% always gone, I do think that it helped, because I started to wake up to the fact that a lot of the things that I had been told with this whole purity culture movement was based and birthed out of this place of like wanting to teach abstinence only sex education, and parents essentially being lazy and not wanting to actually like have real conversations with their kids. And so it made me feel better about myself, because I was like, okay, well, there's people who push back on this. Famously, the guy who authored the book I Kissed Dating Goodbye, which is a huge like basically the handbook for like what courtship looks like. He has famously like denounced that book and said that was like bullshit. And so things like that were starting to happen in that like late 2010s, when I was kind of going through a lot of this stuff. And so I bring all that up to say that it's just like, educate yourself, please, and thank you. Because I don't think a lot of us got the proper education when it came to sex, when it came to pornography, when it came to a pleasure for either of our partners. I think a lot of what we've learned especially for us guys, comes from pornography. And that is unfortunately a fantasy. It's not real. It's make-believe. And, my stances on a lot of stuff have changed over the years. My stance on sex before marriage changed. I believe that sex should be between two people that love each other. I believe that pornography is not inherently evil. I think that there's evil pornography and unethical pornography. I think there's also ethical pornography. I think that masturbation saves lives. And what do I mean by that? I think that it offers an outlet and a release for people who are sexually frustrated, and born out of sexual frustration sometimes comes really nasty stuff. And so that ability to release that and get that dopamine hit, I think can be really beneficial to a lot of people. The other thing that I said I was going to bring up is consent education. This is something that even now I'm learning a lot more about, and I think that there is this idea within Christianity and within purity culture that, I kind of talked about it. When you get married, sex is on the table. And I think for a lot of guys, there's this view that means that I have my own personal porn star, which is not true. And maybe for women it's true. It feel not that it's true, but maybe for women it also sometimes feels that way too. But sexual activity requires consent, and there is no such thing as universal consent. And when it comes to marriage, even if you are with a partner, if your partner says no, it means no. Okay, you don't own them, and you don't owe, and they don't owe you anything. Okay, so I say that because, as someone who got most of his sex ed from pornography does not portray consent at all. It portrays like universal consent, that anything is on the table, right? Vaginal sex, anal sex, oral sex, hand jobs, blowjobs, anything. Anything is on the table, any position. That's just like not the case, right? And so please, for the love of God, educate yourself on consent, and know that no means no. Regardless, male, female, they, them, it doesn't matter who you are. No means no. So yeah, that's my little soapbox there. I don't think I missed anything. I'm hoping I didn't miss anything. This might be a conversation that gets had again. Maybe with other people. Maybe there'll be more things that get unearthed for me as I continue growing as a human being. And I do hope that this was helpful and informative. I don't know 100% why I felt really this need to put this out there. And if you've ridden with me this long in this episode, thank you. If you have your own stuff you want to talk about, whether you agree with me, disagree with me, whatever, I don't care. I welcome the conversation, okay? And so there's two ways you can reach out to me. You can reach out to me on Instagram at EXHS Club, or you can email me at exhsclub@gmail.com. Both those places, I'm pretty active in there, okay? So I would love to have a conversation with anybody and everybody. I'm still open to learning about things, and I don't think I have it all right, okay? Yeah, so with that, I don't know where else to take this, okay? So I'm going to end it there. But thank you again for listening, and I'll see you next week. All right, peace.